GDP is defined by the Bureau of Economic Analysis, or BEA, as a comprehensive measure of U.S. economic activity. You may have heard of GDP appear in the news recently because America's GDP is currently contracting. In Q1, the US GDP fell at an annualized rate of 1.6%. The BEA reported that annualized GDP growth was negative 0.9% in the second quarter. However, it's worth noting that that figure is refined over time to become more and more accurate, so it is unlikely to be the final figure. But it appears that GDP in America has fallen for 2 consecutive quarters, which, as many of you may know, is the technical definition of a recession. The United States is in a slump, but the White House has declared that the country is not in a recession. They appear to have changed the definition. While some argue that 2 quarters of failing real GDP constitute a recession, that is neither the official definition nor how economists assess the state of the economic cycle. The Business Cycle Dating Committee of the National Bureau of Economic Research, the authorized recession scorekeeper, defines a recession as a substantial decline in economic activity that is widespread and lasts for more than a few months. Real personal income minus government transfers, various forms of real consumer spending, employment, and industrial production are typically tracked by the committee. A recession is not a classification that should be thrown around lightly, and while it is amusing that the White House took the time to issue a press release saying it isn't about GDP a week before the disappointing GDP figure was released, they do have a point. A recession is a complex economic situation, and there are some indications that the United States is not in one. So let's dissect this. As the White House so conveniently defined it, a recession is simply a period of prolonged economic contraction. A recession is defined by the National Bureau of Economic Research as a considerable decline in economic activity that is spread across the economy and lasts more than a few months. And while GDP growth has been negative for the past 6 months, that isn't all we have to look at. As stated, variables typically tracked by the committee include real personal income minus government transfers, employment, varying forms of real consumer spending, and industrial production. As one might expect, real personal income falls during a recession, while unemployment rate increases as businesses suffer and people are laid off. Consumer spending will decline as incomes fall and buyers have less money to spend, and industrial production will suffer as businesses cut back significantly. Seeing those 4 things is a pretty safe bet that economic circumstances are deteriorating and the country is in recession. But that's not entirely what we're seeing in the United States right now. Let's go a little deeper. First and foremost, economic output indicates that we may be in a recession. The US GDP is currently contracting, which means that economic output is contracting, and all signs point to a further lag in output. To make sense of this picture, let's quickly review the GDP expenditure perspective. So who is spending money in the United States? Companies spend money to expand their business. People buying new houses are examples of investments. There's domestic consumption, which includes everything people buy on a daily basis. Then there's government spending on government jobs in the military, among other things. Then there's everything foreigners buy in the United States. However, GDP does not include America's expenses on products from other countries, so we must subtract the spending on imports. So GDP rises when businesses invest and buy more goods. Consumers spend more, the government spends more, and foreigners buy US goods. However, it does not rise when Americans purchase foreign goods. The drop in real GDP expressed decreases in private inventory investment, federal government spending, residential fixed investment, and state and local government spending. Increases in non-residential fixed investment and local government spending were partially offset by an increase in exports and personal consumption expenses. As a result, GDP was boosted by foreigners purchasing American goods and increased household spending. However, reductions in government spending, investment spending, and especially inventory spending outweigh the benefits. And if we focus on the decrease in inventory spending, this basically means that businesses are currently overstocked and having difficulty moving their products. As a result, they are spending less on stock replenishment, which will slow manufacturing. Walmart stated in their Q2 earnings release that high inflation is causing customers to concentrate only on the bare essentials, which has ultimately resulted in too much stock in some product categories, such as clothing. Instead of trying to add more stock, they're cutting back on orders and lowering prices to get rid of it. Walmart is just one example, but if this is applied across the board, it will result in fewer orders for new stock and production drops, and that is exactly what is happening. According to Reuters, the ISM's index of national factory activity fell to 52.8% last month, the lowest level since June 2020, when the sector was emerging from a pandemic-induced drop. In June, the PMI stood at 53. A reading above 50 indicates that manufacturing, which accounts for 11.9% of the US economy, is expanding. So, while manufacturing is still expanding, it is doing so at its slowest rate since the pandemic, indicating that the recent surge in demand is coming to an end. So while economic output is holding up for the time being, keep an eye on this in Q3 and Q4. So that's the economic production story. What about the other three variables? Let us look at personal income. When it comes to real income, which is citizens' actual earnings after inflation is taken into account, it is declining. Real average hourly earnings fell by 1% between May and June, which isn't great. However, one important factor is the income. Only recently have levels returned to those seen in Q4 2019, our truly last pre-pandemic quarter. Remember that the large increase in median real incomes of wage and salary workers is primarily due to the fact that the vast majority of jobs lost in 2020 were low-wage service sector jobs, so the median increased significantly. Fast forward to 2022, and now that those jobs have been restored, we're primarily back to where we were before all this began. While it appears that real income is a disaster, it is neither here nor there. As a result, this classification does not actually cry recession. The next figure discussed by the NBER is employment, and this is probably the most compelling argument for those who claim the US is not in a recession. When there is a recession, unemployment rises, businesses suffer, and people are laid off. The unemployment rate reached 10% in 2008 and 2009. Unemployment reached 14.7% during the 2020 snap recession. However, the unemployment rate is now very low at 3.6%. The non-farm payroll workforce or non-agricultural jobs increased to 372,000 in June. Some people think that the United States is not in a recession because too many sectors of the economy, particularly the labor market, are performing exceptionally well. True growth is slowing, but there is still growth in the labor market. Payroll jobs are averaging 450,000 monthly, which is a significantly high level considering the current situation. At 3.6%, the unemployment rate is at a 50-year low. All wage measures are very high, indicating a very strong labor market. With 2.7 million new jobs added in the first half of the year, the economy cannot be in a recession. And that is some solid evidence that the United States is not in a recession. The NBER's final recession indicator is various types of real consumer spending. On the surface, this one appears to be strong as well. When it comes to personal consumption spending, we can see that spending is at an all-time high. People received the money and are now spending it. This is beneficial to businesses and keeps the economy running. Is this spending, however, reliable? This increased spending, exacerbated by inflation, is wreaking havoc on household bank accounts. Savings rates are falling as inflation and interest rates rise. And for many people, their bank balances are rapidly dwindling. Yes, the unemployment rate is low. Yes, income levels remain pre-pandemic. Yes, consumers are still spending, but will the picture be the same in 3 to 6 months? If manufacturing output falls, businesses struggle to move non-essential goods, earnings drop and widespread layoffs occur, and households run out of savings at the same time that the Federal Reserve raises interest rates to combat inflation, there's something fishy about the White House and the Federal Reserve confidently declaring that the US is not on the verge of a recession when we've got so many issues all pointing in that direction. For the time being, the United States does not appear to be in a classic recession. That's all we have for today. If you'd enjoyed the video, why don't you give us a like and subscribe to our finance channel? Don't forget to hit the bell button below to get notifications on when we'd post next. Thank you for staying till the end of the video and hope you enjoyed. See you next time.